I lived in Pennsylvania my entire life, and for 33 years I thought I understood what fear felt like. I thought I knew exhaustion. I thought I knew what it meant to question every single choice I had ever made as a mother. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the 6 months that turned my family into strangers and my peaceful home into a nightly house of horrors. My 5-year-old son woke up screaming every single night at exactly 2:17 in the morning, and when I finally discovered why, the truth didn't just shatter my marriage. It destroyed every relationship I had spent decades building, turned my own parents into my enemies, and left me wondering if the price of saving my child's sanity was worth losing absolutely everything else. For 6 months, I didn't sleep a full night. My son's screams were perfectly timed, perfectly terrified, and they pointed to a secret that involved not just him, but the man I thought I trusted most. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because the decision I made didn't just end my marriage. It cost me the husband I loved, turned our parents against me, and left our family so fractured that my own children haven't spoken to their cousins in 2 years. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and until last March, I had what everyone called the perfect life. I had been married to my husband David for 8 years. We had 2 children, Emma, who was 7, and Connor, who had just turned 5 in February. We lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, the kind of neighborhood where kids rode bikes until dark and neighbors knew each other's names. David worked as a financial analyst at a downtown firm, and I had recently gone back to part-time work as a graphic designer after staying home with the kids for their early years. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. It was stable. It was everything I had worked for. Connor was always my sensitive child. From the time he was a baby, he needed extra cuddles, extra reassurance, extra everything. He cried more than Emma ever did. He struggled with transitions. Starting preschool had been traumatic for him, and it took months before he stopped clinging to my leg every morning at drop-off. But by the time he turned 5, he seemed to be coming into his own. He was making friends. He was laughing more. He was sleeping through the night consistently for the first time in his life. I remember thinking in early March that we had finally turned a corner as a family. I remember feeling grateful that the hardest years of parenting were behind us. Then March 15th happened. I remember the date because it was the night everything changed. Connor went to bed normally that evening. David read him his favorite story about dinosaurs. I tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and turned on his nightlight shaped like a rocket ship. He fell asleep easily, just like he had been doing for months. David and I stayed up watching a movie, something we rarely got to do. We went to bed around 11, feeling relaxed and connected. At 2:17 in the morning, a sound ripped through our house that made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't crying. It wasn't a nightmare whimper. It was screaming. Pure, primal, terror-filled screaming that sounded like my child was being murdered in his bed. I was out of my bed and running down the hallway before I was fully conscious. David was right behind me. We burst into Connor's room to find him sitting upright in his bed, eyes wide open but completely unseeing, screaming at the top of his lungs. His face was red. Tears were streaming down his cheeks. His entire body was rigid with fear. I tried to grab him, to hold him, to comfort him, but he didn't respond. He looked right through me like I wasn't there. He kept screaming and screaming and screaming. David and I tried everything in those first few minutes. We turned on the lights. We spoke to him softly. We tried to wake him up. Nothing worked. He just kept screaming, trapped in whatever horror was playing out in his mind. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes, the screaming stopped as suddenly as it started. Connor blinked, looked around in confusion, and then simply lay back down and went back to sleep. Just like that. Like nothing had happened. David and I stood there in his room, hearts pounding, completely shaken. We checked him over for any signs of injury or illness. Nothing. He was fine, sleeping peacefully, breathing normally. We went back to bed that night, telling ourselves it was just a bad dream. Kids have nightmares. It happens. It was scary, but it was normal. We would talk to him about it in the morning. Except in the morning, Connor had no memory of it. None. When we asked him if he had a bad dream, he looked at us blankly and said no. When we described what happened, he seemed confused and a little scared by our description. He insisted he slept fine. He seemed completely himself. Happy, energetic, ready for breakfast and cartoons. We let it go. We figured it was a one-time thing, but it wasn't. The next night, at exactly 2:17 in the morning, it happened again. The same blood-curdling screams, the same unseeing eyes, the same 5-minute episode that ended as abruptly as it began. And again in the morning, Connor remembered nothing. By the third night, I was already dreading bedtime. By the fourth night, I was sleeping in Connor's room on an air mattress, convinced that being there when it started would somehow help. It didn't. On the fifth night, David started researching night terrors online at 3 in the morning while I sat on the floor of Connor's room, exhausted and terrified. Night terrors, we learned, are different from nightmares. They happen during deep sleep, usually in the first few hours after falling asleep. The child appears awake but isn't. They don't respond to comfort. They don't remember the episode. They're most common in children between ages 3 and 7. Everything we read matched what Connor was experiencing perfectly. The articles all said the same things. Don't try to wake the child. Make sure they're safe. Wait it out. They'll outgrow it. Most children do. It's more distressing for the parents than the child. Just be patient. So we tried to be patient. We followed all the advice. We made sure Connor's room was safe so he couldn't hurt himself during an episode. We established a calming bedtime routine. We made sure he wasn't overtired. We eliminated screen time before bed. We tried earlier bedtimes and later bedtimes. We tried a sound machine. We tried complete darkness, and we tried a brighter nightlight. We tried everything. And every single night at 2:17 in the morning, Connor screamed like he was dying. By the end of the first week, I was functioning on maybe 3 hours of broken sleep a night. Even on the rare occasions when Connor slept through, I couldn't sleep because I was waiting for the screaming to start. I would lie in my bed staring at the ceiling, watching the clock tick closer to 2:17, my entire body tense with anticipation. David was struggling too, but he had to function at work during the day. I was working from home, so I took on most of the night duty. I became a zombie. I was drinking 5 cups of coffee a day. I was snapping at Emma for no reason. I was crying at random moments. I felt like I was losing my mind. After 2 weeks, I took Connor to our pediatrician. Dr. Martinez had known Connor since birth. She listened to my description of the episodes, asked detailed questions, and examined Connor thoroughly. She confirmed what we had already suspected: night terrors. She assured me they were common and harmless. She said Connor would outgrow them. She suggested keeping a sleep diary to see if there were any triggers we could identify. She prescribed melatonin to help Connor sleep more deeply, thinking that might reduce the frequency. She sent us home with reassurance and a pamphlet about pediatric sleep disorders. The melatonin didn't help. If anything, Connor seemed to sleep even more deeply, which made the terrors more intense. The sleep diary revealed nothing useful. There was no pattern to when the terrors were worse or better. They just happened. Every night, same time, same intensity, same duration. I started to dread the nights more than I had ever dreaded anything in my life. The sound of Connor's screaming became embedded in my brain. I would hear it even when it wasn't happening. I would be at the grocery store in the middle of the day and suddenly hear that scream in my head and have to grip the shopping cart to steady myself. David and I started arguing, not about Connor exactly, but about everything else. We were both exhausted and stressed and scared. He thought I was being too anxious about the whole thing. I thought he wasn't taking it seriously enough because he wasn't the one dealing with it every single night. He wanted to just wait it out, like the doctor said. I wanted to do more, to find answers, to fix it. We stopped having date nights. We stopped having conversations that weren't about Connor's sleep. We stopped having any kind of physical intimacy because we were both too tired and stressed. Our marriage started to crack under the weight of those nightly screams. By the end of March, a month into this nightmare, I took Connor to a pediatric sleep specialist. This required a referral and a 2-week wait for an appointment and a 2-hour drive to a children's hospital in Philadelphia. The specialist, Dr. Chen, was kind and thorough. She wanted to do a sleep study. She explained that they would have Connor sleep overnight in the hospital while connected to monitors that would track his brain waves, breathing, heart rate, and movements. She said it would help them understand what was happening during these episodes and rule out any underlying sleep disorders. The sleep study was scheduled for 3 weeks later because of their backlog. Those 3 weeks were some of the longest of my life. I was holding on to this sleep study like it was a life raft. I convinced myself that once we had data, once we had answers, we could fix this. We could make it stop. Connor would sleep peacefully again. Our lives would go back to normal. I just had to survive until the sleep study. During those weeks, I started noticing other changes in Connor. He was more clingy during the day. He didn't want to be alone in any room. He started having accidents again, something he hadn't done in over a year. He became anxious about things that never bothered him before. He didn't want to go to his friend Lucas's house for a play date. He cried when I tried to leave him at Sunday school. He started asking strange questions like whether our house was safe and whether bad people could get inside. I told myself it was all related to being tired from the disrupted sleep, but deep down, something felt off. The sleep study finally happened in late April. I stayed overnight with Connor in the hospital room while he was hooked up to what seemed like 100 wires and sensors. It was uncomfortable and strange, and I didn't think he would sleep at all, let alone have a night terror in such an unfamiliar environment. But at 2:17 in the morning, right on schedule, Connor started screaming. The nurses and technicians came running. They monitored everything while I sat there helplessly watching my son trapped in terror. Afterward, they told me the data would be analyzed and we would have results in about a week. The results came back completely normal. Connor's brain activity was normal. His breathing was normal. Everything was normal. The night terror was classified as a typical parasomnia event. No underlying disorder. No medical explanation beyond the standard night terror diagnosis. Dr. Chen recommended continuing with good sleep hygiene and reassured me once again that Connor would outgrow this. She suggested maybe trying a low dose of an anxiety medication if things didn't improve in another few months. She sent us home, and I felt more hopeless than ever. May arrived, and nothing changed. Connor screamed every night at 2:17. I barely slept. David and I barely spoke. Emma started acting out at school because, as her teacher gently told me, she was clearly stressed from whatever was happening at home. My parents called less frequently because I think they didn't know what to say anymore. My friends stopped inviting me to things because I always said no. I was too tired, too stressed, too consumed by this thing that was eating our family alive. I started having dark thoughts. I started wondering if I was being punished for something. I started questioning whether I was a good mother. A good mother would know how to fix this. A good mother would find the answer. I tried everything anyone suggested. I took Connor to a chiropractor who specialized in pediatric care, thinking maybe a physical alignment issue was causing disrupted sleep. I tried essential oils and homeopathic remedies. I changed his diet completely, eliminating sugar, eliminating dairy, eliminating anything that might possibly be a trigger. I bought new sheets, new pajamas, new everything. I prayed, I cried. I begged the universe for a break. Nothing worked. The screaming continued. Every night, same time, like clockwork. By mid-May, I was starting to think the unthinkable. I was starting to wonder if something else was wrong, something the doctors weren't seeing, something medical that was being missed. I took Connor to a neurologist to rule out seizures. I took him to an allergist to rule out environmental triggers. I took him to a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma and anxiety. Every single doctor and specialist said the same thing. Connor was fine. He was a healthy, normal 5-year-old with night terrors. It would pass. Be patient. And I wanted to scream at them that I had been patient for 2 months, and my child was still screaming every night, and something was wrong, and why couldn't anyone help me? The therapist was the first person who suggested that maybe something in Connor's environment was causing stress that was manifesting as night terrors. She asked detailed questions about our family life, about changes or transitions, about Connor's relationships with the people in his life. I told her everything was fine. We were a normal, stable family. No major changes, no trauma. Nothing that would explain this. She gave Connor some coping tools for anxiety. She taught him breathing exercises and gave him a worry stone to hold. She suggested family therapy for all of us to work through the stress of the situation. We went to 3 sessions. Then I started to notice something. It was subtle at first, easy to dismiss. But once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. The pattern. Connor's night terrors seemed worse on certain nights. Not every night was exactly the same. Most nights, the screaming lasted about 5 minutes, but some nights it lasted longer. Some nights Connor seemed more distressed than others. Some nights it took him longer to settle back to sleep afterward. And when I started paying attention, really paying attention, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The worst nights always happened after David had put Connor to bed alone. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. I was so exhausted and stressed that I was seeing patterns where there were none. But I started keeping track. I started writing down in my sleep diary not just when Connor had terrors, but who had been with him that evening, who put him to bed, what the routine had been, and the pattern became undeniable. When I put Connor to bed, the night terrors were bad but manageable. When David put Connor to bed, especially when David had spent the evening alone with Connor while I was out or working late, the night terrors were worse, longer, more intense, more distressing. I didn't want to believe what my brain was starting to suggest. David was Connor's father. David loved Connor. David had never done anything to make me think he would hurt our children. He wasn't violent. He wasn't aggressive. He was a good dad. He played with the kids. He helped with homework. He coached Emma's soccer team. The idea that David could be doing something to cause Connor's terror was insane, but the pattern was there, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I started watching more carefully. I started paying attention to how Connor acted around David, and I started seeing things that had always been there but that I had explained away. Connor was different with David than he was with me. He was quieter, more careful, less playful. When David asked Connor to do something, Connor did it immediately, without question. When I asked Connor to do something, he might negotiate or complain like a normal 5-year-old. With David, there was no negotiation, just immediate compliance. I had always thought it was because David had a firmer parenting style than me. But now I started wondering if it was something else. Fear. I felt insane, even thinking it. I felt like a terrible wife for suspecting my husband of anything. But I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. I couldn't ignore the pattern. I couldn't ignore the way Connor sometimes flinched when David raised his voice. I couldn't ignore the way Connor always wanted me to put him to bed, never David. I couldn't ignore the fact that Connor's anxiety and behavioral changes had started around the same time as the night terrors. Something was wrong. And every instinct I had as a mother was screaming that David was connected to it somehow. I didn't know what to do with this information. I couldn't just accuse David of something without proof. I couldn't destroy my marriage and my family based on a feeling and a pattern that might be coincidence, but I also couldn't just ignore it. I couldn't keep watching my son suffer night after night when I suspected someone was causing it. I was trapped between my role as a wife and my role as a mother, and my role as a mother was winning. I tried to talk to David about it in the most gentle way possible. One night, after Connor had a particularly bad episode, I asked David if anything had happened earlier that evening. If Connor had been upset about anything, if they had argued, or if Connor had been scared of something. David looked at me like I was crazy. He said no. Everything had been fine. Connor had been happy, they had played video games, and had a good time. He asked why I was asking. I said I was just trying to find patterns, trying to understand the triggers. He told me I was overthinking it. He told me I was so exhausted I was starting to see problems where there weren't any. He told me I needed to just accept that this was a phase and it would pass. His reaction made me more suspicious, not less. He was defensive. He was dismissive. He was shutting down the conversation instead of engaging with my concerns. An innocent person would want to help, would want to explore every possibility to help their child. But David just wanted me to stop asking questions. That was the moment I knew something was really wrong. That was the moment I decided I needed to find out the truth, whatever it was, no matter what it cost. I started investigating. I felt like a spy in my own home. I started checking things when David wasn't around. I went through his phone while he was in the shower. I checked his computer history when he was at work. I was looking for anything, evidence of an affair that might be causing him stress that he was taking out on Connor, evidence of financial problems, evidence of anything that would explain what was happening. I found nothing. His phone was boring. Work emails, texts with colleagues, sports scores. His computer history was the same. Work stuff, news sites, nothing unusual. I started listening at doors. When David was alone with Connor, I would find a reason to be nearby. I would strain to hear their conversations. I would pay attention to the tone of David's voice, to any sounds of distress from Connor. I never heard anything alarming, just normal parent-child interactions, reminders to brush teeth, discussions about school, questions about what Connor wanted for dinner. Nothing that would explain the night terrors, nothing that would confirm my suspicions, but also nothing that would ease them. I thought about talking to Connor directly, but he was 5 years old. He couldn't articulate complex feelings or identify manipulation. And if something was happening, I didn't want to plant ideas in his head or traumatize him further by asking leading questions. I thought about talking to Emma, asking if she had noticed anything strange about how Dad acted with Connor, but she was only 7. I didn't want to involve her in this if I was wrong. I didn't want to damage her relationship with her father based on my paranoid suspicions. I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I couldn't talk to my friends about this because how do you tell someone you suspect your husband is hurting your child when you have no proof? I couldn't talk to my parents because they adored David and would think I had lost my mind. I couldn't talk to David because he was the person I suspected. I couldn't talk to Connor because he was too young. I was completely isolated with this terrible suspicion and no way to prove or disprove it. The night terrors continued. June arrived and Connor was still screaming every night at 2:17. I had been dealing with this for almost 3 months. I had been investigating David for 2 weeks. I was barely functioning. I was making mistakes at work. I forgot to pick Emma up from soccer practice one day and didn't realize until the coach called me. I stopped eating properly. I lost 12 pounds. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. I looked haunted, desperate, broken. Now, this is where I did something that I want you to advise me on if I was right or wrong. Driven to the brink by exhaustion and fear, I made a decision that would change everything. I installed a hidden camera in Connor's room. I ordered it online. a small device that looked like a phone charger that could record video and audio continuously. I felt sick doing it. I felt like I was violating my child's privacy, violating my husband's trust, potentially breaking laws. But I felt like I had no choice. I needed to know what was happening. I needed to see what was happening when I wasn't there. I needed proof of something, anything, that would explain why my baby was screaming every night. I installed the camera one afternoon when David was at work and both kids were at school. I set it up on Connor's dresser, plugged in like it was just charging something overnight. The angle captured most of the room, including Connor's bed and the door. I set it to record continuously and saved to cloud storage so I could access it from my phone. My hands were shaking the entire time. I felt like a criminal. I felt like I was crossing a line I could never uncross. But I also felt like I was finally doing something, finally taking action instead of just suffering and waiting. That night, I acted completely normal. I made dinner. I helped Emma with her homework. I gave Connor his bath. David asked if I wanted him to put Connor to bed, and I said yes, even though every fiber of my being wanted to say no. I wanted to see what happened when David was alone with Connor. I wanted the camera to capture their bedtime routine. I needed to know. I sat downstairs pretending to work on my laptop while David was upstairs with Connor. I had my phone next to me with the camera feed pulled up, but I didn't watch it live. I was too scared, too anxious. I told myself I would review the footage later. David came downstairs about 30 minutes later and said Connor was asleep. We watched television for a bit. We went to bed. And at 2:17 in the morning, Connor screamed. Same as every night, I went to comfort him through his episode. He settled after about 6 minutes. I went back to bed. My heart was pounding. I knew I had footage. I knew tomorrow I would watch it. And I was terrified of what I might see. The next morning, David left for work at 7:30. Emma left for school at 8. Connor was at home with me because it was summer break, and I was working from home. I told Connor to play in the living room, and I went into my bedroom and locked the door. I pulled up the camera footage on my laptop. I started watching from the moment David walked into Connor's room the night before. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. What I saw on that footage broke something fundamental inside me. David walked into Connor's room with a smile. He helped Connor get into bed. He pulled up the covers. And then he sat on the edge of the bed and started talking to Connor in a soft voice. The audio was clear. He told Connor a story, but it wasn't a bedtime story. It was a horror story. He told Connor in vivid, terrifying detail about monsters that hide in closets and under beds. He told Connor about bad men who steal children from their rooms at night. He told Connor about all the terrible things that could happen if Connor wasn't careful, wasn't obedient, wasn't perfect. He described in detail what these monsters looked like. He described their claws and their teeth and their hunger for little boys who misbehave. He described the sounds they make when they're coming to get you. He described exactly where they hide and exactly when they come out. Always at night. Always when you're sleeping. Always when you think you're safe. He made Connor repeat back to him the details of the monsters. He made Connor promise to be good or else the monsters would come. He made Connor promise not to tell anyone about the monsters because talking about them makes them angry and they'll come faster. The entire conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then David kissed Connor on the forehead, told him he loved him, and left the room. The timestamp showed Connor lay awake for another hour, staring at the ceiling, clearly terrified, before finally falling into an exhausted sleep. And hours later, at 2:17, Connor started screaming about the monsters, screaming about the bad men, screaming about the terror that his father had deliberately planted in his brain before bed. I watched the footage 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't process that the man I married, the father of my children, was deliberately psychologically torturing our 5-year-old son every night before bed. I couldn't understand why. I couldn't understand what kind of person does this to a child, to their own child. I sat on my bedroom floor and sobbed until I had nothing left inside me. Then the shock turned to rage, pure, burning, protective rage. Everything made sense now. The pattern of worse night terrors after David put Connor to bed. Connor's increasing anxiety and behavioral changes, his fear of being alone, his need for constant reassurance that he was safe, his questions about whether bad people could get into the house. David had been systematically traumatizing our son for months. While I was running to doctors and specialists trying to fix a medical problem, David was creating the problem. While I was losing my mind with exhaustion and fear, David was the cause of it all. While I was begging for help, the person I should have been protecting Connor from was sleeping next to me every night. I went back through the saved footage from the previous nights when the camera had been recording. Every single night that David put Connor to bed, he told him these stories. Sometimes they were shorter. Sometimes they were more elaborate. But every single time, David spent the last few minutes before Connor tried to sleep filling his head with terror. Some nights, David would add new details about the monsters. Some nights, he would remind Connor of previous details and make sure Connor remembered them. It was systematic. It was deliberate. It was calculated. It was abuse. I had to know if this was happening on nights when I put Connor to bed too. I watched the footage from the nights when I had done the bedtime routine. Those nights, I read Connor normal stories. I sang him songs. I kissed him goodnight and left. No monsters, no horror stories, no psychological torture. But Connor still had night terrors those nights too, just less severe ones, because David had already planted the seeds. The terror was already in Connor's brain. It was already there in his subconscious, surfacing every night in the form of screaming and panic. I realized something else as I sat there reviewing the footage. David had been watching me fall apart for 3 months. He had watched me take Connor to doctors and specialists. He had watched me lose sleep, lose weight, lose my mind trying to find a medical explanation for something he was deliberately causing. He had held me while I cried about how helpless I felt. He had listened to me blame myself for not being able to fix this. And the entire time he knew. He knew exactly what was causing it, because he was causing it. He watched me suffer and did nothing to stop it. In fact, he seemed to escalate it. The stories got worse over time, more detailed, more terrifying, like he was experimenting to see how much fear he could create. I didn't understand why. I still don't fully understand why. What kind of person does this? What was he getting out of it? Was it some sick sense of power? Was he punishing Connor for something? Was he punishing me? Was this about control? About seeing how far he could push before I broke? I had so many questions and no answers, but the why didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was protecting Connor. What mattered was making it stop. I called my sister first. Her name is Jessica, and she lives about 30 minutes away. I told her I needed her to come over immediately, that it was an emergency, but that I couldn't explain over the phone. She heard the panic in my voice and said she would be there in 20 minutes. While I waited for her, I saved all the footage to multiple locations. I uploaded it to a secure cloud drive. I emailed it to myself. I made sure I had copies that David couldn't delete or destroy. This was my evidence. This was my proof. This was what would protect Connor when David inevitably tried to deny everything. Jessica arrived and I showed her the footage. She watched in complete silence, her face getting paler and paler. When it ended, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said we needed to call the police. I told her I wasn't ready for that yet. I needed to confront David first. I needed to hear him explain this. I needed to give him a chance to confess, to show remorse, to give me some reason why I shouldn't destroy his entire life the way he had been destroying our son's peace. Jessica argued with me. She said I needed to protect Connor first and deal with David second. She said David was dangerous and unpredictable, and I had no idea what he might do if I confronted him. But I was beyond reason at that point. I needed to face him. I needed him to know that I knew. I needed him to see what he had done to our family. Jessica finally agreed to stay with me for the confrontation. She insisted on it. She said if I was going to do this, I wasn't doing it alone. I texted David and asked him to come home for lunch, said we needed to talk about something important. He texted back asking if everything was okay. I said it would be better to talk in person. He said he would be home in an hour. That hour was the longest of my life. Jessica took both kids to the backyard to play so they wouldn't hear what was about to happen. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the footage queued up, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and rage and fear. When David walked in the door, he was smiling. He asked what was so urgent. He asked if Connor had finally slept through the night. The casualness of his tone, the fake concern in his voice, made me want to scream. Instead, I told him to sit down. I told him I had something to show him. I turned the laptop around and hit play. I watched his face as he watched the footage of himself telling Connor horror stories about monsters and kidnappers. I watched the blood drain from his face. I watched his expression go from confusion to recognition to panic. When the clip ended, there was silence. Complete, heavy silence. I asked him to explain. I asked him to tell me why he had been terrorizing our 5-year-old son for months. I asked him to make me understand. David's first response was denial. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said he was just trying to teach Connor to be careful, to be aware of dangers in the world. He said every parent tells their kids to be cautious about strangers and to be safe. I told him that was bullshit. I told him there was a difference between teaching safety and deliberately creating terror. I told him he had been watching me fall apart for 3 months while knowing exactly what was causing Connor's night terrors. He had no response to that. He just sat there, staring at the table. Then he tried to minimize it. He said he didn't realize it was affecting Connor so badly. He said he didn't mean for it to cause night terrors. He said he thought he was doing the right thing, preparing Connor for a dangerous world. I asked him why he never mentioned these bedtime stories to me. Why he never told me what he was doing if he thought it was normal parenting. Why he told Connor not to tell anyone about the monsters if there was nothing wrong with what he was doing. He had no answer. His excuses fell apart under the slightest pressure. Then he started crying. He said he didn't know why he did it. He said something was wrong with him. He said he needed help. He said he loved Connor and never meant to hurt him. He begged me not to call the police. He begged me to let him fix this. He promised he would stop. He promised he would go to therapy. He promised he would do whatever it took to make this right. He reached for my hand and I jerked away from him like he was poisonous, because in that moment he was. He was poison to our family, to our son, to everything we had built together. I told him I wanted him out of the house. I told him to pack a bag and leave immediately. I told him not to contact Connor or Emma until I decided what was going to happen next. He started to argue, started to say he had rights. This was his house too. I couldn't just kick him out. Jessica, who had been standing quietly in the doorway, told him that if he didn't leave voluntarily in the next 10 minutes, we would call the police and show them the footage, and he could explain to them why he had been psychologically abusing a 5-year-old child. That shut him up. He went upstairs, threw some clothes in a bag, and left. He didn't say goodbye to the kids. He just got in his car and drove away. After he left, I broke down completely. Jessica held me while I sobbed. I cried for my son who had been living in fear for months. I cried for my marriage that I realized had been a lie. I cried for the life I thought I had that was now destroyed. I cried from exhaustion and relief and grief all mixed together. Eventually, I pulled myself together because I had to tell Connor that everything was going to be okay now, that the monsters weren't real, that Daddy had been wrong to tell him those stories, that he was safe. Connor didn't understand at first. He was confused about why Daddy left. He was scared that the monsters would be angry that he talked about them. It took hours of gentle reassurance to start to undo the damage David had done. I told Connor that there were no monsters. I showed him his closet was empty. I showed him under his bed was empty. I told him that Daddy had made a mistake telling him those scary stories. I told him that nothing bad would happen to him, that he was safe, that I would always protect him. He wanted to believe me, but the fear was so deep. David had spent months building it. It wasn't going to disappear in one conversation. That night, I slept in Connor's room again, but this time not just to comfort him through night terrors. I slept there to prove to him that I wasn't afraid of his room, that it was safe, that nothing bad would happen. At 2:17, I held my breath, waiting for the screaming. It didn't come. Connor stirred a little, whimpered softly, but then settled back to sleep. No screaming, no terror. For the first time in 3 months, Connor slept through the night. I lay awake on that air mattress, crying tears of relief and vindication. My suspicions had been right. The problem had been David all along, and now that David was gone, Connor could finally rest. The next few days were a blur of difficult conversations and devastating realizations. I had to tell Emma that Daddy wasn't living with us anymore. I kept the explanation age-appropriate, just saying that Daddy had done something that wasn't okay and needed to live somewhere else for a while. Emma was upset and confused, but she accepted it. I called my parents to tell them what happened. That conversation was harder than I expected. They didn't believe me at first. They said there must be some misunderstanding. David was such a good father. He would never hurt the kids. I sent them the footage. After they watched it, they called me back, horrified and apologetic. They offered to come stay with us. I said I needed some time to process everything first. I called David's parents too. That conversation was a disaster. They refused to believe their son could do something like this. They said I must have edited the footage or manipulated it somehow. They said I was making up lies to destroy their son. They said they would fight me for custody of the kids if I tried to keep David away from them. I told them to do whatever they felt they needed to do, but David was not going to be alone with Connor again until he got serious help. They hung up on me. I called a lawyer that week to start divorce proceedings. The lawyer listened to my story, watched the footage, and told me I had a strong case for full custody. She said what David did constituted psychological abuse, and no judge would grant him unsupervised visitation after seeing that evidence. She filed the initial paperwork. David was served with divorce papers at the hotel where he had been staying. He called me, begging me to reconsider, begging for another chance. I told him the only chance he would get was the chance to see his kids supervised by a third party after he completed a psychological evaluation and a parenting course. I told him I was done. The marriage was over. Connor's night terrors stopped almost immediately. He slept peacefully most nights after David left. Occasionally he would have a mild nightmare, but nothing like the blood-curdling screams we had endured for 3 months. He started acting like himself again, more relaxed, more playful, less anxious. His accidents stopped. His clinginess decreased. It was like watching a flower bloom after a long winter. My baby was coming back to me. But while Connor was healing, everything else in my life was falling apart. David told his family his version of the story, painting me as a crazy, vindictive wife who was keeping him from his children over some innocent bedtime stories. They believed him. His parents hired their own lawyer and threatened to sue for grandparent visitation rights. David's sister called me screaming, accusing me of destroying the family. David's brother left me a voicemail saying I would regret this, that David was a good man and I was tearing him down over nothing. Then David's parents did something I never expected. They called my parents and told them their version of the story. They said I had isolated David from the kids over a misunderstanding. They said I was unstable and needed help. They said David was devastated and suicidal, and I was destroying him. My parents called me confused and concerned. I had to explain the situation all over again. I had to show them more footage. I had to convince my own parents that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't overreacting, that what David did was serious and unforgivable. My parents ultimately sided with me, but they were torn. David had been part of our family for almost a decade. They loved him like a son. His parents had become their friends. Our families got together for holidays and birthdays and vacations. My decision to divorce David and cut him off from the kids didn't just end my marriage. It split our extended families down the middle. David's parents stopped speaking to my parents. David's siblings stopped speaking to my siblings. Family events became impossible to navigate. The worst part was what happened between me and my younger brother Mark. Mark had always been close with David. They bonded over sports and guy stuff in a way that Mark and I never connected. When Mark heard about the divorce, he called David to get his side of the story. David told him I was exaggerating, that the footage was taken out of context, that he was just being a protective father teaching his son about dangers. Mark believed him. Mark called me and told me I was destroying a good man over nothing. He said I was being a helicopter parent who couldn't handle the normal realities of raising boys. He said David was right to teach Connor to be tough and aware. I tried to explain to Mark what really happened. I tried to make him understand that this wasn't about being overprotective. This was about deliberate psychological abuse. But Mark had made up his mind. He told me I was making a mistake. He told me I would regret this. He told me that Connor would grow up resenting me for keeping him from his father. Then he told me he was choosing to support David through this because someone needed to. That was the last real conversation I had with my brother. We haven't spoken since. The divorce proceedings were ugly. David fought for joint custody. His lawyer argued that the footage showed nothing more than a father telling cautionary tales to teach his son about safety. They brought in an expert who testified that parents have wide latitude in their parenting choices and that while David's approach might not be ideal, it didn't constitute abuse. They argued that Connor's night terrors were a coincidence, that the medical records showed they were diagnosed as normal parasomnias with no identified cause. They argued that I was an overwrought mother who had latched onto an innocent explanation and blown it out of proportion. My lawyer presented our own expert, a child psychologist who reviewed the footage and testified that what David did was textbook psychological abuse designed to create fear and compliance in a child. She explained how the detailed, vivid stories about monsters and kidnappers before bedtime would cause night terrors in any child, especially one as sensitive as Connor. She explained how David telling Connor not to tell anyone about the monsters showed consciousness of wrongdoing. She explained how the timing and severity of Connor's night terrors, correlating directly with David's presence, proved causation. The judge reviewed everything: the footage, the medical records, the testimony. After 3 months of hearings and evaluations and arguments, the judge ruled in my favor. I was granted full physical custody of both children. David was granted supervised visitation only, pending completion of a psychological evaluation and a parenting course. The judge stated clearly in his ruling that what David did constituted psychological abuse and that the children's safety and well-being required restricted contact until David could demonstrate he understood the harm he caused and had preyed away, taken steps to ensure it wouldn't happen again. David never completed the evaluation or the course. After the custody ruling came down, he seemed to give up. He moved 3 hours away for a new job. He sent child support payments, but he didn't fight for more visitation. He didn't call the kids on their birthdays. He didn't show up for holidays. He just disappeared from their lives almost completely. Emma was devastated. She didn't understand why Daddy left. She didn't understand why Daddy didn't want to see her anymore. I tried to explain in age-appropriate terms, But how do you tell your daughter that her father chose to walk away?" Connor seemed almost relieved. He never asked about David. He never asked when Daddy was coming back. He just moved on like David had never existed. The fallout in our extended family continued for months. David's parents blamed me entirely for their son's absence from their grandchildren's lives. They sent letters threatening legal action. They showed up at our house demanding to see the kids. I had to get a restraining order. My parents tried to mediate, tried to keep peace between the families, but it was impossible. David's parents wanted me to admit I was wrong, to beg David to come back, to restore their access to their grandchildren. I refused. Their son had abused my child. That was unforgivable. There would be no reconciliation. My relationship with my extended family never recovered. Family gatherings became divided. Either I was invited or David's family was invited, never both. Most of the family chose David's side because his parents were more established, more connected, more vocal in their defense of their son. My cousins stopped calling. My aunts and uncles stopped inviting us to events. We became the pariahs, the family member who destroyed the family unity, the one who chose to blow up everything over what they saw as a parenting disagreement. The absolute worst casualty of all this was the relationship between my children and David's side of the family, including their cousins. My kids had been close with David's brother's children. They had grown up together. They had play dates and sleepovers and birthday parties together. After the divorce and the custody battle, David's brother forbid his children from seeing Emma and Connor. He said he didn't want his kids exposed to my influence, that I was unstable and vindictive. The kids didn't understand. Emma asked constantly why she couldn't see her cousins anymore. I had to explain that sometimes adults make decisions that hurt kids, and this was one of those times. It's been 2 years now. My children haven't seen their cousins in all that time. They don't get invited to family Christmas anymore. They don't get invited to family reunions. They've lost their entire extended family on their father's side. My own family tried to stay neutral at first, but eventually they got tired of the conflict. My brother Mark still doesn't speak to me. He's still in contact with David. He still believes I overreacted. My parents speak to me, but our relationship is strained. They love me and support me, but they're sad about what happened to our family. They miss the way things used to be. They miss having David as a son-in-law. They miss the unified family gatherings. Every conversation with them has this undercurrent of grief for what was lost. I lost most of my friends too. The couple friends we had were forced to choose sides. Most of them chose David because they couldn't believe he would really hurt his kids. They thought I was being paranoid and overprotective. They thought I had taken normal parenting too far. The few friends who believed me couldn't handle the drama. They didn't want to get involved in the family conflict. They stopped calling, stopped inviting us over, stopped including us in group activities. I went from having a rich social life to being completely isolated except for my sister Jessica, who stood by me through everything. My career suffered too. I had to take so much time off for court dates, for therapy appointments for the kids, for meetings with lawyers and mediators. My boss was understanding at first, but eventually she sat me down and told me my personal life was affecting my work performance. I was missing deadlines. I was making mistakes. I was distracted and unreliable. She didn't fire me, but I was passed over for a promotion I had been working toward. I was excluded from major projects. I became the employee with too much personal drama, the one who couldn't be counted on. Financially, everything became harder. I went from a 2-income household to a single-income household overnight. Yes, David paid child support, but it didn't come close to replacing his full income. I had to pay for all the legal fees for the divorce and custody battle. I had to pay for therapy for both kids. I had to maintain the house and all the bills on my salary alone. I burned through our savings. I had to stop contributing to retirement. I had to give up the small luxuries we used to afford. No more family vacations, no more eating out, No more dance classes for Emma or soccer league for Connor. We were okay, but we were stretched thin in a way we had never been before. 2 years later, I'm still dealing with the aftermath of that decision I made to install that camera. Connor is doing well. He's 7 now. He sleeps peacefully. He's thriving in school. He's happy and healthy and well-adjusted. He has no memory of the night terrors anymore. When I ask him if he remembers being scared at night when he was 5, he looks at me blankly and says no. The child brain is resilient. It protects itself by forgetting trauma. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful Connor doesn't carry the weight of what his father did to him. Emma is struggling more. She's 9 now, and she understands more about what happened and why her father left. She's angry at me sometimes for driving Daddy away. She's angry at David for choosing not to be involved in her life. She's confused about why her cousins can't see her anymore. She's in therapy to work through all of it. Her therapist says she's doing okay considering the circumstances, but that the family fracture will affect her for years. She's learning that adult decisions have consequences for kids. She's learning that families can break, and sometimes they don't get fixed. I'm in therapy too. I've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder from the 6 months of night terrors and the aftermath of the divorce. I still sometimes wake up at 2:17 in the morning, my heart pounding, waiting for screaming that doesn't come anymore. I still have trust issues. I still have anxiety. I still question every decision I make. Was I right to install the camera? Was I right to divorce David? Was I right to fight for full custody? Was I right to maintain the boundaries with his family, even when it cost my kids their extended family? I've been told by my therapist that I did the right thing, that protecting my child was the right choice, that I couldn't have known the full cost ahead of time, but the guilt and doubt remain. Dating again has been impossible. I don't trust anyone. I can't imagine letting another person into our lives, into our home, around my children. What if I miss the signs again? What if I choose wrong again? I thought David was a good man. I thought I knew him. I was completely wrong. How do I trust my judgment again? I've been on 2 dates in 2 years. Both times, I ended things after the first meeting. I couldn't do it. I couldn't open myself up to that vulnerability again. My relationship with my parents has gotten better over time. They fully understand and support what I did now. They've seen Connor thrive without David. They've seen the court documents. They've accepted that David was abusive and that I had no choice but to remove him from our lives. But the extended family is still fractured. David's parents still hate me. David's siblings still blame me. The cousins still don't see each other. There's no path to reconciliation because David's family refuses to acknowledge what he did was wrong. Last month, I ran into David at a grocery store. It was the first time I had seen him in over a year. He looked older, tired. He tried to talk to me. He asked how the kids were. I gave him minimal information and walked away. He called after me saying he was sorry, saying he wished things had turned out differently, saying he had been going to therapy and had realized how much damage he caused. I didn't respond. I just kept walking. I don't know if his remorse is real. I don't know if he's actually getting help. I don't care. It's too late. The damage is done. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never installed that camera. If I had just accepted the doctor's diagnosis of night terrors and waited for Connor to outgrow them like everyone said he would. Would the night terrors have eventually stopped anyway? Would David have eventually stopped telling those stories? Would our marriage have survived? Would our family still be intact? Would Connor have grown up with his cousins and his extended family and his father? I'll never know. I can't know. I made the choice I made based on the information and instincts I had at the time. What I do know is this. My son is safe. He's happy. He sleeps peacefully every single night. He doesn't live in fear anymore. He's not being psychologically tormented by someone who's supposed to protect him. That's what matters. That's what I have to hold on to when the guilt and doubt creep in. I saved my son. I protected him when no one else would. When the doctors couldn't help, when the specialists had no answers, when my husband was the source of the problem, I figured it out and I fixed it. I did what a mother is supposed to do. But the cost was so much higher than I ever imagined. I thought I was just solving the night terror problem. I thought once I knew the cause, we could address it and move on. I never imagined it would end my marriage. I never imagined it would fracture my entire extended family. I never imagined my children would lose their father, their grandparents, their aunts and uncles, their cousins. I never imagined I would become estranged from my own brother. I never imagined the judgment and blame and isolation that would come from choosing to protect my child over maintaining family peace. People who haven't been through something like this don't understand the impossible position I was in. They say things like, "Why didn't you just talk to David first? Why did you have to divorce him? Why couldn't you work it out? Why did you have to cut off his whole family? Why did you have to make such a big deal out of it?" They don't understand that you can't compromise on a child's safety. They don't understand that psychological abuse is real abuse. They don't understand that a man who deliberately terrorizes his 5-year-old every night isn't safe to be around that child. They don't understand that his family defending his actions People who don't know the full story look at me like I'm the villain. The bitter ex-wife who turned the kids against their father. The paranoid mother who blew up her family over bedtime stories. The vindictive daughter-in-law who destroyed her in-laws' relationship with their grandchildren. I've been called every name. I've been accused of parental alienation. I've been told I'm damaging my children more by keeping them from their father than David ever did with his stories. The lack of understanding, the willingness to blame the mother for protecting her child, the rush to defend the father no matter what he did, has been devastating. I've learned that people are really uncomfortable with the idea that abuse can be subtle and psychological. They want abuse to look a certain way. They want bruises and broken bones. They want obvious, undeniable harm. When abuse is emotional or psychological, when it's manipulation and fear instead of violence, people struggle to take it seriously. They minimize it. They make excuses for it. They blame the victim for overreacting. I've had people tell me that David was just trying to toughen Connor up, that boys need to learn to be brave, that a little fear is good for kids, that I was raising Connor to be soft and David was just counteracting my coddling, as if deliberately giving your child night terrors is normal parenting. I've also learned that mothers can't win. If I had done nothing, if I had ignored my instincts and let the night terrors continue, I would have been blamed for not protecting my son. I would have been accused of neglect for not doing enough to find the cause. But because I did investigate, because I did find the cause, because I did take action to protect my son, I'm blamed for overreacting. I'm blamed for being too protective. I'm blamed for destroying a family. There's no right answer for mothers. We're damned if we do and damned if we don't. The legal system was better than society in general, but not by much. Even with video evidence of what David was doing, even with expert testimony about the psychological harm, even with the clear correlation between David's actions and Connor's symptoms, it was a fight. David's lawyer tried every angle to minimize and excuse his behavior. The court system was willing to at least consider that maybe this wasn't really abuse. Maybe this was just a parenting difference. Maybe I was overreacting. It took months and thousands of dollars in legal fees to get a judge to agree that yes, what David did was abuse, and yes, Connor needed to be protected from it. Looking back now, 2 years later, I would make the same choice again, despite everything it cost, despite the fractured family and the lost relationships and the financial strain and the judgment and the pain. I would install that camera again. I would expose what David was doing again. I would fight for full custody again. because the alternative was leaving Connor in the care of someone who was deliberately harming him. The alternative was prioritizing my marriage and my extended family relationships over my child's mental health and safety. That was never really an option. A mother protects her child, period, no matter what it costs. But I wish I had known the full cost ahead of time. I wish someone had warned me that protecting your child from abuse doesn't just mean stopping the abuse. It means dealing with everyone who wants to minimize the abuse, excuse the abuse, deny the abuse. It means losing everyone who values family unity over child safety. It means being vilified and blamed and judged. It means watching your child lose their entire extended family because the adults in that family would rather maintain their denial than acknowledge the truth. I was prepared to lose David. I wasn't prepared to lose everyone else, too. The isolation has been profound. I used to have a full life. I had a husband, an extended family, a rich network of friends, a thriving career. Now I have my 2 kids, my sister, my parents at a distance, and a job I'm barely holding on to. I spend my evenings at home because I have no one to go out with. I spend holidays with just my small nuclear family because we're not invited anywhere else. I watch other families with their big gatherings and their intact relationships and their apparent happiness, and I feel a grief so deep it sometimes takes my breath away. Not grief for David. I don't miss him. I miss the life I thought I had before I knew the truth. The worst moments are when Emma asks why we can't see the cousins anymore, why Grandma and Grandpa on Daddy's side don't call, why Uncle Mark doesn't come around. I've tried to explain in ways she can understand, but how do you explain adult betrayal and complicity to a 9-year-old? How do you explain that sometimes loving someone means standing up to them, even when everyone else chooses to look away? How do you explain that doing the right thing doesn't mean things turn out okay? I tell her that sometimes grown-ups make decisions that hurt kids, and it's not fair, but that's how life works sometimes. I tell her that I will always choose to protect her and Connor, even when it's hard. I tell her that one day she'll understand. But I see the confusion and sadness in her eyes, and I wonder if I'm telling the truth. Connor is still too young to fully understand what happened. He knows Daddy lives somewhere else. He knows Daddy made choices that weren't good. He knows he's safe now. That's enough for him right now. But one day he'll ask more questions. One day he'll want to know the details. One day I'll have to tell him that his father deliberately traumatized him every night for months, that his father watched him suffer and did nothing to stop it, that his father chose power and control over his well-being. I dread that conversation. I dread seeing Connor's face when he realizes that his father wasn't safe, that his father hurt him on purpose. But I'll have that conversation when the time comes, because Connor deserves the truth. My therapist tells me I need to forgive myself for the consequences of my choice. She says I'm carrying guilt for things that aren't my fault. She says David's actions caused this fracture, not mine. She says his family's choice to defend him caused the estrangement, not mine. She says I only did what any good mother would do. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are 2 different things. I still lie awake at night sometimes, wondering if there was a better way. If there was some path I didn't see that would have protected Connor without destroying everything else. I don't think there was. But the wondering remains. What I've learned through all of this is that being a mother means making impossible choices. It means choosing between bad options and worse options. It means living with consequences you couldn't fully predict. It means standing alone when everyone else sits down. It means trusting your instincts even when the experts tell you you're wrong. It means protecting your child even when protecting them costs you everything else. It means being the villain in other people's stories so you can be the hero in your child's story. It's not what I thought motherhood would be. It's harder and lonelier and more painful than I ever imagined. But every night I go into Connor's room before I go to bed. I watch him sleep peacefully. I see his relaxed face, his steady breathing, his complete absence of fear. I remember what it used to be like, the screaming, the terror, the helplessness, and I know I made the right choice. Whatever it cost me, it was worth it to give him back his peaceful sleep. It was worth it to give him back his childhood. It was worth it to give him safety in his own home. That's what matters. That's what I have to hold on to. The family will probably never heal. David's parents will probably always hate me. Mark will probably never speak to me again. The cousins will probably grow up as strangers. David will probably never have a real relationship with his kids. These are the permanent consequences of the choice I made. But Connor sleeps through the night. Connor is happy and healthy and safe. Connor will grow up knowing that his mother protected him, that she chose him, that she fought for him even when it cost her everything else. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that has to be enough. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to install that hidden camera, expose what David was doing to Connor, and fight to remove him from our lives. Because this decision didn't just end my marriage early. It cost me the husband I loved, turned our parents against me in different ways, and left our family so fractured that my own children haven't spoken to their cousins in 2 years. And I'm sure they won't be inviting us to their next family event this year.